So finally, how will we tell them? We've talked a lot about the people we should talk to. We should understand their needs. We should understand that what we say should relate to their needs. It should be based on features, advantages and benefits. Let's now talk finally about the way we present our case to our customers. And I'm going to focus particularly on presenting information to a group of people that you might be having to sell to. So your sales presentation. The key to success, preparation, preparation, preparation. We need to be clear about who we're talking to, what we want to achieve, what we're going to say, and all that sort of thing happens beforehand. If we are going to use sales aids, or if we're going to use the dreaded PowerPoint, then clearly all those things need to be prepared. I don't like standard company presentations. A lot of companies spend a lot of money on having really nice professional presentations put together about their company. Why do you think I don't really like that sort of approach? Any thoughts? Why do you think, or what is the limitation of the company presentation?
Honesty, maybe.
Lacks honesty? Well, hopefully not. One thing I do believe quite passionately about is that as professional salespeople, we are absolutely honest. We are there to help our customers achieve something.
What's in it for me?
What's in it for you? And why is a company presentation limited in that area?
I don't give a shit about the company.
So that's this French drink again, is it? Yeah. Okay. That's absolutely right. You know, by definition, it is not going to be related to the customers. It's not going to be related to their needs. It's about you. It's not about them. And if there's one thing that's important, I think it's trying to make your presentation about them. It's about saying to them that you understand their problems and here is a potential solution that you could offer them that would meet those problems. So, in the first place, what do we mean by preparation? First of all, we need to be clear about the objective. What do we want to achieve from the presentation? Can I stress, please, not what am I going to talk about only, but what do I want to achieve? What do I want my audience to do, to think? What action do I want them to take as a result of the presentation that I'm making to them about my company and its products? I then need to plan the content. I need to think about how I'm going to deliver it. I need to think about some visual aids. If I'm going to use visual aids, those may be on a laptop, they may be on a screen like this. Depends entirely on the situation you're working in. And ideally, we want to rehearse and practice. If you happen to use some complex PowerPoint slides to describe processes, then it's always a good idea to do those in the privacy of your own home before you do it in front of a customer. Because, as we say in England, sure as eggs are eggs, the thing will go wrong if you don't do that. So decide on your objective. What could the objective of our sales presentation be? What alternatives have we got, do you think? Anybody? Even those of you at the back? What might we want to do from our sales presentation?
Close the sale.
Close the sale. Absolutely. Do we always close the sale?
No.
Not always. What else could we do if we don't close the sale?
Leave a lasting impression.
Leave a good impression. Yep. They need to think, yeah, some future here.
Get into communication with the client.
Get into communication. We might well need to find out during our presentation who else we need to speak to. In many large organizations, there is often, in fact usually, more than one person who we need to be talking to. Different people in the organization. Okay, so we could present a sales proposal. We could simply be providing information about our company, but please, that is not the standard company presentation. It's how we can help them. It's achieving a sale or creating a future sales opportunity, or it is getting information from them. Perhaps we always think of presentations as being one way. Please recognize we also see presentations as an opportunity, particularly in the getting to know you phase of any sales discussion, as a way of getting information from people. Point I've made to you, if you're selling to a group, recognize there are different people in that group. Will this work? The technical people want to know technicalities. Will this work for me? This person here might be involved in the accountancy side. He needs to know whether or not you can reduce costs. The chap in the middle there, he is actually the decision maker. And please remember, the decision maker is not always the same person as the individual who has the technical need. One of the great frustrations is the technicians love our product, but the guy who has the money and who says yes has yet to be persuaded. And the challenge you have, of course, is when you talk to the technical person, you then rely on that technical person to talk to the boss. And they're usually going to do it in terms of features, not benefits. So try and get to all of them if you can. So in terms of preparation, here's a little way that you can think about that. If you think about the members of the audience, who they are, what their role is. In that instance, this particular chap, David, he is responsible for a financial appraisal of your proposition. John, on the other hand, he's the user. He's the guy who's actually going to use your product in his factory. What are their needs? Just go through that mental process, because that then gives you a focus for some of the content of the presentation that you then make. Now, when it comes to the presentation, all presentations should have some sort of structure. You may have heard the little phrase, tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them. 3 parts. I'm going to call the tell them what you're going to tell them bit the start. The next bit is the body, and finally the conclusion. Whenever we make a presentation, a sales presentation, we should think about dividing it up into those sections. And what I'd like to do now is just to go through particularly the start and the conclusion. How do we structure those? What are the things that we should contain in each particular part? Presentations are like aeroplanes. They're most vulnerable on takeoff and landing. The beginning, the end of a presentation, really quite important. So the start. Welcoming courtesies. Thank you for coming. Say who you are. Say who your company is. We then need what I describe as a preamble. This is the bit that goes before your presentation. We set the scene, and we should relate that preamble, the setting scene, to the needs of your customer. I'll give you an example of that in a moment. Once we've set the scene, and that should be no more than a couple of sentences, we then go on to what I call the intention, which is where we say, and this is what I want to tell you about, and this is what I hope you're going to gain from the presentation I'm about to make. And then, taking the analogy of the journey, we talk about the route map. How am I going to go through this? My route map to you this morning was, we need to talk about where we're going to take things. We need to talk about who we're going to talk to. We need to think about what we're going to say to them. And finally, we need to think about how we're going to say it. That's an example of a route map through what you've been listening to this morning. And finally, continuing the analogy of the journey, the rules of the road. You've already learned that there's going to be some information on the website that you can take away. Do we want people to take notes? How can people ask questions? How are we going to conduct things? It's a good idea to tell your audience beforehand. So the start of your presentation, and this is true actually of any presentation, but especially a sales presentation, think about that as a checklist of things that you will include in the opening of what you're going to say. The preamble. So it's a short story that relates to their needs. And then what you're going to talk about. If we talk about the intention, there is a broad structure. You might like to make a note of that one, because it helps you again to think about making sure you focus on what it is your customers are going to get from you. I would like to talk to you about, and whatever the topic is you're going to cover, so that you can. So that you can. The bit when I just ask people to make a presentation to me, say on a course, that I hear is usually I'm going to talk to you about, but I don't always hear the so that you can statement. And yet in many ways that's the thing that will capture my imagination. Here's an example of a preamble. This is the bit that goes before. That's a rather long slide. I'll talk to you very briefly about slides in a minute. Shouldn't have too much on a slide. Have a read of that. That would be an example of an intention statement that I may make to you for this particular presentation. I'm going to talk to you about this so that you can do that. Okay? And if you get that right, hopefully your audience are going to say, ah, yes, there's something here in it for me. Not, good morning, everybody, I'm going to talk to you about my company. Our company was started in 1982. We were based in the middle of England. We do a variety of things. We were involved in recruitment work, consultancy work, blah, 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 blah. It's of no interest, is it? It really is of no interest at all. So there's an example of a preamble, and again my proposition to you is when you are structuring the beginning of your presentation, think about that little story that just sets the scene, and then, sorry, that was an example of an intention, and then move on to giving the intention of your particular presentation. So, I say, my suggestion to you would be that when you go away from today, you all have a go at thinking about the next presentation that you are going to make, and have a go at actually writing a start. Welcome, self-introduction, preamble, intention, route map, rules of the road. I know it's a bit of a formula, but it will serve you well. It will serve you well. It's just a checklist to make sure you don't forget about things. And I guess these days as well, if you're talking to big groups, and I didn't do it this morning, it's quite a good idea to ask big groups to switch off their mobile phones, because they can be quite a nuisance. Okay, so there are the five sections there. The conclusion, remember my aeroplane, the landing, what do we do at the end? The number of times, again, I've heard presentations that say, right, well, you know, that's all I want to tell you about. Thank you very much for listening. Always summarize the key points, and always leave your audience with a strong take-home message. The take-home message relates back to your intention, what it is you want your customer to do, to think, as a result of the presentation that you've just made. Now then, question time. How often have you been to a presentation, maybe in your companies, where the presenter has told you the story, they've come to the end, and they said, okay, so are there any questions? Anyone experience that? And then you have questions and answers, then you run out of time, and that's it. Anyone experience that? Mm-hmm. Yeah? In a sales situation, what is the danger of that? You don't close the sale. That's true. You get the wrong questions. If you get the wrong questions, what messages do your audience leave with in their minds? Confusion. They go away with the messages from people who have bad questions to ask. They don't go away with your take-home message. Here's a proposition to you. When you are thinking about questions, here's a slight development of that structure I've just mentioned. The start, the body, and the conclusion. The start, as I've described, the main body of your presentation, and your conclusion. I suggest to you the usual but wrong place for questions is right at the end, because what I would rather you do is this. I'd rather you have a little summary at the end of your presentation, then take discussion, and then please move on to your conclusion. Then move on to your conclusion. Make sure that the last thing that is said is your take-home message. It is not that difficult question from someone in your audience. So if I was concluding now and I said to you, so today we've been talking about presenting your case to foreign buyers. We've talked about a number of issues around the importance of understanding their needs. We've talked a bit about how to present it. And I hope that when you next make your presentation, you will take some of those points away with you and put them into practice. Thank you very much. Bang. Finish. That is a conclusion. That is leaving you with a take-home message. It's not a question of saying that and say, so, are there any questions? And someone says, yeah, it's all very well, Chris, but we can't do so-and-so because of... And then we start arguing about that, and the whole thing goes downhill. That is the risk if you leave your questions right to the end of your presentation. Okay, so try and see questions, if you are going to take questions at the end or discussions, in the middle. It's part of the body. It's not right at the end of your presentation. Encouraging discussions. We need to encourage discussions, and just to remind you of those open questions, rather than saying, are there any questions, saying, so, how do you feel about that? What potential benefits do you think that would bring to your business? Actually stimulate the discussion rather than just saying, are there any questions, and waiting for people to ask those questions. And those what, why, when, where, how, who questions are very useful for doing that. Now, when it comes to the body of the presentation, one of the challenges you've got is to try and keep the concentration of your audience over that period of time. A couple of things that you can do. First of all, if you use what I describe as a logical development, try and tell the story in some sort of order that makes sense to your audience. And similarly, you might say, let's say, for example, you were making a proposition, I don't know whether any of you do this, to, let's say, a funding organisation to support further research. You might say, this is what happened in the past, this is where we're at now, this is what we want to do in the future. And past, present and future gives you some sort of logical development of the story that you're making. Remind the audience where you are. From time to time during your presentation, you said at the beginning what you're going to talk about. You can talk about A, B and C. We've talked about A, we've talked about B. Now let's move on and talk about C. Just give some structure to the way that you're presenting your message. We've talked about who we have to sell to, where they may be. We've talked a bit about what we might say to them. Now we're going to talk about how we might deliver our message. That's an example of signposting within the presentation you make. Helps the audience to concentrate. And finally, of course, adapt your approach to the audience. Visual aids. Visual aids provide a focus for what you're saying. Some people are, or find visual aids more useful than others, but there are some do's and don'ts on visual aids. I'd just like to very, very briefly go through a couple with you. What do you hate about PowerPoint? What do you hate about PowerPoint? We have a saying in England, death by PowerPoint. What do you hate about PowerPoint?
Text.
Text. What I'd like to do today is to talk to you about, and then we're going to read this, and we have our back to the audience, and you don't have any engagement at all, do you? Keep it simple. Keep it really simple. Animation in PowerPoint can be very useful, but use it to tell a story. Here's an example. Let's say you were going on an overseas sales trip. We're going to travel to the airport. We're going to pass through security. We're going to fly to London. We're going to travel to the customer, and then we're going to go home again. Rather than putting the whole thing up at once, animate it so you can take each stage of the story in turn. It helps you to tell your story. It helps the audience to concentrate. 6 bullet points per slide, please, maximum. Just check your slides if you use PowerPoint. If you've got more than 6, see if you can make it 6. Too many words on the slide, nobody reads them, and it's very tempting for you to turn with your back to the audience and read the slides. Please don't do that. You may have a picture, gentleman down here in the travel industry, so a nice picture of where we're going to take someone, and I want to show them the hotel they're going to stay at. Here it is. Let's let the PowerPoint slide do it for us. It's much more effective if we do it like that. That particular animation, if you're not familiar with it on PowerPoint, is called zoom in. Just cut out a picture there, expand it. You can talk to your audience. Let the pictures do their work for you. Don't dash up and point at the slides and so on. It's bad form. The point is that you may be very familiar with your visual aids. Your customer is seeing them for the first time. Please deliver your message slowly. Those of you who might be involved in giving technical information, really important when it comes to graphs. If we're going to show a histogram, for example, and PowerPoint will do this for you. If you're not familiar with it, just play with it until you find how to do it. Say you're showing a histogram, show the axes first, okay? and then introduce, in that case, series 1, tell your stories about those particular issues, tell the story about those particular issues, and then tell your story about those. Don't just slap up the graph on the screen and say, as you can see from this graph, because of course the audience can't. And the same applies to spreadsheets. Really, really poor as a means of communicating information when you're making a presentation. The other thing is showing samples. Many of you may make sales presentations to your buyers using a sample. And if you have, say, 3 or 4 people in a room and you give one of them a sample, they'll be looking at that. The next person then will be thinking, oh, I'm going to have a look at that soon. The next people think, oh, I wonder what's going on over there. They're not listening to you. So if you are going to hand out samples, sales aids or whatever, shut up. Just wait for it to go around the room. Okay? Very important. And finally, when it comes to delivery, please think about your stance, your gesture. Sometimes in small groups it's appropriate to sit down. You're working with a group of people at their level. If you have a large group like this, it would be wrong, I guess, if I was sitting down talking to you. I need to stand up. Think about whether you're going to stand up or sit down. Maintain an open posture. We talked earlier about body language and this sort of issue. And try and maintain eye contact with all the members of your audience. So say you've got 3 or 4 people in the buying group, talk to all of them as individuals. There's no such thing as a group of individual people. And they all have different needs, and they're all listening out for something which is important to them, the benefits to them, in other words. Okay, and finally, when it comes to other resources you need, preparing notes. The fewer the better. PowerPoint slides are a very useful form of notes that you can use just to keep you on track with what it is you want to talk to people about. It's helpful for you as a presenter, it's helpful for your audience, just really as headings. But please make sure that the size of the font that you use is big enough when you're talking about slides. And if you're using your PowerPoint slides as notes, for example, like this, then again, it's helpful if they're nice and big so that you can see what you're doing. A little tip I would give you, which you may or may not be familiar with, actually a set of interest, how many of you do use PowerPoint for sales presentations? Some of you? Not all. Those of you who do. If you hide the odd slide that you think, if you think there's a question that is likely to come up, because it always comes up, have a slide which answers that question. Say you know it's slide number 20. It's not part of your presentation, but when the customer asks that question, you think, yeah, I've got a slide on that. 2, 0 on your keypad, enter, and you will go to slide number 20. So you don't go tap, 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 and go back to the slide you wanted. That means you need a copy of your slides with the numbers on. So say I wanted to show you the notice that I've just described. That's slide number 51. 5-1, enter, and you'd go straight back to that slide. Quite a useful technique. And the other thing is, I mean, this machine here allows me to blank the screen, like that. When you're talking to someone, if you're talking about something that is not related to your slide, please blank the screen. If you haven't got one of these, the B on your keypad will blank the screen. I don't know if you've tried that. Just press B and the slide goes. You can then talk to people and you don't have the distraction of the slide behind you. And finally, we need to think about the sort of people that we're talking to, because different audiences from different countries actually have different expectations. In terms of listening, apparently Nordic audiences are good listeners, for which thank you. German people generally have the longest attention span, and they do like detail. We should not stereotype cultures, but I had a recent experience where I had to do a series of one-day sessions in a number of different countries. In Spain, there was a video link. I was working in Barcelona. There was a video link to Madrid, which didn't work, and there was no one about to fix it. In Germany, everybody arrived absolutely on time. In Italy, well, we were expecting a few more people than came, but some people turned up and half of them had to go halfway through. We mustn't culturally stereotype, but certainly there are definite trends in different cultures. And certainly if you're talking to a German audience, and I think to some extent an audience in the Netherlands, detail, facts, get it wrong in the 4th decimal place, and your proposition will be destroyed by that. In some cases, if you go into too much detail, oh, bored with this. US, shortest attention span. Come on, let's get on with it. Bang. UK and Canada. Apparently we will give you polite attention, but we'd like to talk about it afterwards. And finally, Latins, so people from Spain, Southern Europe and so on, they generally tend to be slightly less attentive. They want to be involved, they want to chatter. That's fine. And things like body language, gestures and all those sorts of things, much, much bigger. I'm sure those of you who've been on holiday to the Mediterranean will know exactly what I mean by that. So not only should we think about the structure of what we're saying, we should think about what we say, which is about benefits. Benefits relate to needs. We need to think about the audience that we're talking to, not only because they have different needs, but perhaps because they have different listening styles. And we need to understand the markets that we're going to, because everything that I've said needs to be directed to a particular segment which you need to decide as part of your company strategy when you're looking to develop your business in an export market. So I hope over the last couple of hours I've given you some thoughts on to things that you can do when you go back to your businesses. I would ask you, particularly those of you who have to present to your foreign buyers, to think very, very long and hard about what those buyers expect from you, the way they expect to receive information, and above all, what you can do for them. I hope the last couple of hours has given you something that you can do, and thanks very much for your attention. Thanks.